Welcome back again to Get Git, Introduction to Version Control with Git and GitHub. I'm Evan Williamson, Digital Instructor Librarian at University of Idaho Library. This is the fifth video of our series, and in this video we're going to be exploring Git history. So in the last video we were walking through all the basic commands: git add, git commit, git pull, git push. So now we have a good set of commits, bunch of history in this demo repository that we've been working on. If you haven't seen those videos, you might want to go back in the playlist and watch those before you get into this one. And now we want to look at that history, explore it, figure out what we can do with it. I mean, we have all this history stored away. Why is that good? Why is version control important? So we've already seen one version of that by looking at our repository that we have up here on GitHub. We have this spot right here where we can click on the commits and see an output of all the commits that have been made in our repository. We can see the message, who did it, when it was done, this little unique identifier, and then we can click in here and see exactly what the changes that happened. So in this case we have this example commit with the commit message, this extra line I added, who did it, when they did it, and then these changes to these individual files. So two of the files that were in this repository were changed. We had some additions and one deletion. The deletions are in red and the additions are in green. So that was one version of looking at it that we've seen so far on GitHub, and it's actually a really great way to explore your history. We can do some of that same type of stuff on the command line. And it's also going to let us do a couple other things that are useful for undoing some commits inside of your repository. And so we're going to walk through some of those basics here, and they're just kind of sort of demonstrations, and you can kind of follow through it on the outline on your own if you would like as well. So I'm back here in my repository on my terminal where we left off in the last video. And the first thing we want to do is take a look at Git Log. And so this is essentially the same thing as what you can see by doing this on GitHub. Is we're going to hold on here, I've got to clean up some windows that I have open. We're going to just use the command. So we're using the application Git and we're giving it the command log, and you're going to press enter, and it's just going to start giving me all of the commits. You can see here's these unique identifiers, the person who did it, the time that they did it, and then the message that they give for that commit. And if you want to navigate through these, you can use the page up and page down button. This is a long bunch of text in your terminal. You can use your arrow keys to just go up and down it. And then when you're done, you can see this little colon that's down in the corner on your terminal. This is a common practice in other types of terminal applications as well. When it's taking up the whole screen, you can use the arrows to navigate, but then when you're done, you just click Q to get out of that view, and then you get back to your regular terminal window here on the command prompt. So we did git log. If you want to look at that in a little simpler, more compressed format, you can do git log one line. And so now here's all these commits, and they just give us the short identifier because those are unique enough in an average project to be able to find all the commits. You don't actually need that big huge long one that we saw here. And then it puts everything in the first line of your commit message all into one line. So it's a lot more compact. If we know what we're looking for, we can quickly find it in this log. Now you can also string the output of something like git log into other command line tools such as grep, and so that would be a really common way to try to find something in a great big long history. You could just git log one line grep initial or something like that, and to try to find the thing that you want out of this big long list of commit messages. This is one way to start viewing it, and like I said, you can go back over here and compare it to this page, which is essentially the same thing. And it is honestly a lot nicer to look at that history here on the visual version of that. But there's times when you would want to just quickly be able to grab one of these identifiers. So using Git Log is going to be really helpful for that. We can compare the different the changes that we've currently introduced in our repository using the command git diff. And so we can compare the different files, we can compare different branches, but the basic usage that we're going to just walk through right now would be to compare some changes that we've just created with what is currently committed, the last commit in the history. And so if we just go into our repository that we've been working on here, let me go find it. So we've been working here in this repository, and if I just go in and make another set of changes here, I'm just going to use my text editor again, and we're just going to, maybe we'll add a line here, and maybe we'll add another one down here, and Control S to save that, and I'll just close that out. So we've changed something in that repository. We're going to go ahead and follow along this little outline. So we're going to do a Git Status, and it gives us the status that we've been seeing. We have one thing that's staged, or is changed, but is not staged yet for a commit. So we can do a git diff right now. And it's going to give you this little bit of output that shows that something's changed. It can detect that there's some differences, and it's actually doing a diff of just the changed files. And so it has the files right here as it is in the current history, and as it is in the working directory as it is right now. And we can see a kind of output of the things that are different, and the things that are different that have been added are in green. So we see these two lines have been added in green, and if we had some stuff that was being deleted out of there, those would be highlighted in red with a minus. And you're going to see that it kind of like summarizes the file, so it doesn't actually show us the whole file. It just shows us the context of where those changes are. So it's showing a couple lines above the change and a couple lines below the change, and the same here, where we're showing some lines above that change and then nothing below because there's actually no other lines below it. So we can use that Q to get out of that view again. And so that's the diff. We can also just specifically say git diff and give the file name that we want to make a diff for. So if we happen to have multiple changes in the repository, we didn't want to look at all the changes, we just want to look at this one particular file, we can specify that one directly instead. Now let's go ahead and do a git add and add that file into the staging area and see what that does for us. If we do a git diff now, you're going to see that nothing comes up because we've put this in the staging area. Now Git is not considering that. It's kind of considering that as ready. It's not in the history yet, but it is ready to be put in the history, so it's not considering that a different change that we'd want to look at using diff. And so it's just not showing anything. There's no difference right now because we've added everything into that staging area, and it's comparing it against that area and the history. So let's do a git commit, and so we'll commit that in. It shows that there was one file changed, 4 things were inserted, and we could do a git diff again just to see what that gives us. And you're going to see it doesn't give us anything because we haven't made any changes. So it's a good idea to go ahead and use git diff on a regular basis. Again, I wouldn't typically actually use it on the command line because it's actually not as easy to use as if you're using some visualization built into your editor. And so if we look back again, I'm going to just give you that demo like we did in the last video of using Visual Studio Code to see what this diff would look like in that context instead. So we can go over here, we can, let's add another line in here. Let's see, I'm going to edit something inside one of these lines this time. So I've edited a line here. And edited a line here. So now you can see my editor kind of knows that that change has happened. And I go over to this version control tab where it shows that there's changes that have happened in my working directory. And so the equivalent of doing diff is just clicking on this file here, and it's going to give me this visualization in a much more visual way than what we saw in the command line. If you're working in your editor, this happens to be a really nice way to check that diff, and it highlights exactly this line, green, green. This is the one that's changed. This is the exact bit that's changed. This line is green. This is the exact bit with a kind of darker green, highlighting exactly these changes. So diff is really a powerful and helpful thing for you to be able to find what you did, make sure that you know what you're committing into your repository. And so I'm just going to do this git add and do another commit using my Visual Studio Code version this time. That's a way to use Git, and it's really going to help you understand what's changed and debug any problems that you're having in your work. Okay, the next command that we need to look at is called Git Checkout, and Checkout is a little bit of a complicated command that does a few different things, but one of the things that it can do is to check out to get a version of the file as it was at a different point in your history. And so we can use Git Log to find those unique IDs for each of your commit messages, or we can also refer to them using a little shortcut that's kind of sequential. And so the most recent commit in your history is called head, all capital. And if you want one back from that, you do head little NA1, which in Git language we call head -1, and so on. So we have head -1, head -2, and you can just kind of refer to them sequentially back from where you are currently right now. And so this is just a handy kind of shortcut. If you say get checkout and then you give one of the specific file names, it's going to reset that file back to the version that was in that commit that you reference, and it's going to reset it into your working directory. So let's just go take a little walkthrough on what that looks like. So let's say we want to get back to, I just made those changes to the notes.txt. Let's do a git log. So that was another demo commit. We'll get out of there, and we will want to check out the version that's not right now that we just committed, but one back before I made those changes. So we're going to do a get checkout head -1, and then we're going to put in the file name notes.txt, and I use tab complete to get that file name. Now let's click enter to have that done. And so it's changed one of the files that's in our working directory, the file that is notes.txt. And so if we go and look at it, and I open that with another editor, if you remember those little changes that I had made, I added cats in here somewhere, and I put a bunch of 2s right here. And so those are gone because we've just updated it. We went back to the earlier version that we've extracted out of our history. And so if we do a git status, let's see where we're at. Okay, so now it's showing that something's modified. And this is a kind of important concept to understand, is that when we pulled that version out of our history and kind of restored it back to that earlier version, Git is seeing that sequentially. We've pulled that version out, we've put it into our working directory. Now it's just a normal change, as if we just edited that file back into that version. And so it's a normal change that needs to be committed. or needed to be added and then committed if it's something that we actually want to use. It's kind of nice to be able to do that because sometimes you might check it out, that file like that, because you just want to check what the differences were to that earlier version. So you like, last time I knew that everything was working was 3 commits ago, this file worked. You can check that back out and then do a diff to see what was the difference between our current version and this version that did work 3 versions ago, or 3 commits ago. And so that's a really nice way to start debugging and looking through your history and discovering the exact little changes that you've made that have caused a problem or solved a problem. And so sometimes you just check it out because you want to check that diff, see what the differences were, and then you want to go back and so I'll give you that example in VS Code here. So I've checked out this version. You can see that it's currently in a staged change. And you can see here that it's showing me like my nice diff here. So I can figure out what the differences were between that current version and the version from one commit ago. So if we just want to undo that, well, we can check that diff again. It's showing you those exact changes. Here's the red lines is what was deleted. The green line is what replaces that line. This is what was there, and this is what replaces it. If we just want to undoing that, we can just do a check out the regular version once again. So if I just do a checkout head notes, that means check out the current version that is stored in our history, so the last commit essentially. So I'll just press enter on that, and if we do a little Git Status again, nothing is changed because those 2 checkouts that we did, first we did a git checkout head -1 on that file, that changed stuff in our working directory. When I did a git checkout head with no minuses, so check out the current version, I just got us back to where we were. So maybe in this case, in this little demo, we were just checking to see what the differences were between that earlier version and this one, because we had a little bit of confusion going on. If we did in fact want to restore that earlier version, we'll have to, as I said, do the git add and do the git commit. So we can just try that again. So I'm going to do the git checkout head -1, and I'm going to use notes again and enter. So it's changed that. If I do my git status, you can see that there's a modified file. It's already actually staged for us. So we could do this git add, and then we can do a git commit message. And we give it a message, and we click enter to make that commit. And so now we've gotten back to, we've made another commit, but essentially we checked out this older version of our file and committed it on top of the changes that we had previously made. And so we've done an undo. The cool thing is that this history is linear. We've always added on to that history. We didn't delete that change in between, which was wrong, and we needed to undo it. But we didn't destroy that history. It doesn't disappear from your repository, and so we can actually undo the undo if we need to. And we also can tell, we have a message that we have in our commit messages saying why we had to undo that particular change. So the history stays linear. We can undo our undos, or we can undo in any number of different ways. So it's really important to keep that in mind, that you're kind of continuing to add to this history. You're never deleting it or reverting it and doing other parts like that. Now, one option that you have out there when you're working locally on your machine, sometimes you just made a commit and maybe the message that you put in there was incorrect, or there was one more thing that you wanted to get in that commit that you forgot about, or you forgot to add. And so there's a command, a flag that we can use called git commit dash dash amend, which is going to be just change the last commit. And this only works, you should only do this if you just made a commit and you haven't pushed it yet to your remote. And so this is kind of when you're working on your own, on your local machine, you haven't pushed yet, you can use git amend to just fix the last commit and the last commit only. So let's say we want to actually update that last message that I gave it. And so my last commit message was undo changes to notes. So let's say I just wanted to change that message and nothing else about that commit. I can use git commit, and then I can give that flag amend, and then I'm going to give the message again. And rather than undo changes to notes, I'm going to say demo undo changes to notes. And if I do enter, the only thing that happened was it's just going to update that message of that very last commit. We did not actually add another commit. We just amended the one that was in our history. And as I said, only do that if you haven't pushed it up to GitHub. So otherwise you're going to end up with some weird errors. So that's something that is available if there's something that you just need to fix and you realized it right away. There's another command called Git Revert. And this is going to exactly undo a specific commit by reversing each of the changes that was in that commit. So it's not going to restore your history back to that point. It's not going to undo all the commits that happened along that way. It just does the exact opposite of a single commit. So you need to be very careful about using these types of commands because they are quite powerful and can have some unexpected consequences in your repository. So test it carefully, maybe do this in a branch to make sure that it's doing what you think it's doing. But that's available to you as well. Last thing that I wanted to talk about in the history was Git Ignore. So sometimes in your repository, there's going to be some files that you actually don't want version controlled, and you don't want them sent up to GitHub in that repository. A lot of times this is, let's say I have a source code that generates a website. The website itself that gets output from that source code does not need to be version controlled because the source code is used to build that website, and every time I change something in the source code, it changes something in the website, and that website itself is not the thing that I want to track. That's not the project. The project is the source code, and so I would ignore that folder of files that contains the output. The same thing often with some Python or R where you're using the code to generate some images or some visualization outputs or some data wrangling outputs. You don't really want to version control those outputs because you can always reproduce those by running the code, and they're going to change on a regular basis depending on what the inputs are. And so you want to ignore those output files. Git Ignore is the tool that you have to do that, and it's just a file that you add into your repository. There's quite a lot of examples out there. So if you're starting a certain project using some kind of template, there's usually a Git Ignore template for you that will show what kind of things should be ignored in your project because it's just not necessary to be tracking those files. And so go ahead and take a look at the way that you write this file, but essentially you're just going to be creating a new file called .gitignore and then putting in folder names or file names that you want to ignore into that file, and then Git is going to automatically stop tracking those. It's just going to ignore everything that happens in those folders or in those files, and they're not going to be added to GitHub, and they're not going to be tracked by Git. Just make sure you create that .gitignore file and then you commit that .gitignore file into your repository. So it's often the first thing that you might do while you're setting up your repository for your project. And as I said, a lot of those templates are available for the different frameworks that you might be working with. Let's push these changes that we have just done since we've been working on our repository again. And we did a Git status here, and we are 3 commits ahead of GitHub, so I'm going to do the Git push to make sure that I have all of that synced with my remote. If I go back over to my remote again and refresh, again I can see this essentially a Git log visualization here and view all those changes in the history. So that's the quick overview of some stuff that you might want to do with your Git history. The next video section is going to be looking at Git branches. So tune in just a little bit, and hopefully we'll see you there.